everything. I'm Ozman Faruqi. I'm here with my co-host Scott Mitchell. Scott, what is up?
Oh, not much is up for me, but the weather is getting real nice. I've got to say, there are upsides to global warming. Oz, how are you?
Weather is good for me too. I'm in Sydney this week, and look, I'm a big Melbourne defender, but coming to Sydney in October when it's like 27 degrees and sunny and actually warm, and you can feel things, and the jasmine
jacarandas are out this time of year, I bet.
Jacarandas are out. The birds are chirping. It is the airplanes are flying over the house that I'm staying in. If things sound a bit different on this week's episode, that is why, folks. But Scott, before we get into today's episode, I need to tell you about something. I need to tell you about a TV show that I've been watching. I'm not really watching it.
It's been a while since you've given me a rec.
Look, I don't know if this is going to end up being something I actually encourage you to watch, but this show I've given a go. I watched a couple of episodes and it was so completely crazy, I stopped. But given that it's about the media, I figured I should bring it up on this show. Are you across The Morning Show?
Oh, I'm across it as I've seen the promo, Reese Witherspoon, Jennifer Aniston, sort of a Today Show style program. Yeah, you dived into it?
Yeah, that's right. It's Reese Witherspoon, Jennifer Aniston. It premiered back in 2019 on Apple TV Plus, and they are these presenters in the cutthroat world of morning television. And over the last 4 seasons, it's become this rip from the headlines media show, right? These people that tackle topics that are in the news and in our society through the prism of this TV show. I hadn't seen
like Law and Order SVU, ripped straight from the headlines.
Basically. I hadn't seen the first 3 seasons. I was kind of vaguely across what was going on because a lot of the podcasts I listen to about TV talk about this show. But I thought, given that the 4th season was out, I would see what all the fuss is about. And look, the caveat here is even big fans of the show say it's completely lost the plot in its 4th season, though a lot of them are still watching. And I have to say the plot of this show, Scott, is absolutely bonkers. And let me just give you a bit of a snapshot as to where we are at the beginning of season 4 of The Morning Show. Reese Witherspoon's character, no longer a working journalist. She is teaching journalism at a college in West Virginia. And that's because she had to leave the TV network she was employed at because, Scott, her brother was involved in the January 6th riots. He was a pro-Trump rioter at the Capitol. And she actually edited footage of him to try to protect him and kind of got found out by the FBI and her bosses. That is just the first crazy thing
that's no good.
About this show.
That's no good.
Yeah. I mean,
Did
the
she get
obvious
arrested?
question...
Is she in jail?
No, so she cut some weird deal. I don't really understand the full details, but what I find amazing about this is she kind of breached her ethics enough that she can't work as a journalist, but yet she can apparently teach journalism. But it's really just the start of this, Scott, right? So this season is set in 2024. The Olympics are coming up, and the network in this show is the network that's got the rights to the Olympics. Very exciting. They're trying to show off this new AI deep fake technology, right, with Jennifer Aniston's character. And the idea here is that the technology can translate her words into 200 languages in real time. And the network execs are so stoked about this because they're like, 3 billion people watch the Olympics, but not most of them don't watch it in English. We've kind of cracked the code. Of course, that ends up being like a Chekhov's AI because you'll never believe it, Scott. Deep faking comes back in a much more nefarious way to bite Jennifer Aniston's character. Yeah.
In what way?
Oh, okay, it's related to the third crazy thing I'm about to say. And this is the craziest thing that I've seen in a television show this year, right? So because they've got the Olympics, Aniston is interviewing an Iranian fencer, right? This young woman who's visiting America. She's doing some promo ahead of the Olympics. Just before the interview, Jennifer Aniston's character is slipped a note by the fencer's dad that says they want to defect to the USA, right?
Oh my God.
So Aniston's character, who's a journalist, helps organize their escape. She gives them access to her car and her driver, kind of smuggles them out of the office. After a car chase where they escape their Iranian handlers, they make it to the US State Department, right? And that's when Aniston discovers that the dad isn't just a simple dad of a fencer. He's in fact a nuclear scientist. And now Aniston is being investigated. And this is the only reference the show, which is set in 2024 so far, has had to the war in Gaza, where it's like, to Jennifer Aniston's character, like, Alex, this is going to go down so badly. What with like Israel and Iran blowing up right now? It's just like 10 out of 10 crazy television stuff.
That is unbelievable. I mean, I know someone who was a nuclear scientist who defected at one point. Shout out to that unnamed family if they're listening. But I love the Hollywood conception of like journalistic moral kind of quandaries. There's so few shows that get it right. Like, it's all so over egged and like, oh, it's the brother is on January 6th and the father of the fencer is actually a nuclear scientist and embroiled, and journalists are like smuggling people out of doors. There's so few shows that get the ethics of these things right. Like, they are just as fascinating, but so often is the kind of like, you know, failings of like, just more like cowardice and things, and trying to remain strong when things just become banal and there's lots of paperwork to do. It's like, I mean, my favorites are kind of Good Night and Good Luck as a Hollywood film. I think it nails it. And also Sports Night in terms of a TV show is great for that. But that sounds bonkers.
Yeah, I feel like these shows are trying to ape that kind of aesthetic and structure, but the storylines are so out there. I mean, the other crazy thing, first I should say all of the three things that I mentioned happened in the first 20 minutes of the first episode. So like this stuff is
you mentioned you've stopped watching
another level.
That's unbelievable.
The other crazy thing is like the cast of the show, Scott, and this might be why I encourage you to watch it, because maybe like 5 of our favorite actors and actresses are in this show. It's clear that there is so much money being spent on it. Like with so many Apple productions, it's all in the casting and not really in the writing. So you've got, as we said, Witherspoon and Aniston. The show also features Greta Lee, Marion Cotillard, Billy Crudup, Aaron Pierre, Boyd Holbrook, John Hamm, and Jeremy Irons. Like, that's crazy. What are these people doing in this TV show?
I love Jeremy Irons. I mean, I love Marion Cotillard, but Jeremy Irons I didn't see coming in that list.
Yeah, look, absolutely bonkers show. It's one of those ones where I think like anyone with any experience in journalism is going to watch it and kind of cringe a bit. If people like the show, like, that's fine. It is surprising to me, Scott, how many shows about journalism, whether it's like the Newsroom or the morning show that we have, that seem to just like miss so many of the interesting things that actually go on. Like you said, there's already enough crazy stuff happening in newsrooms. You don't have to come up with crazy plots like an Iranian nuclear scientist who wants to defect.
Totally. That's so funny.
All right, Scott, today on the show, we're going to discuss the latest in Gaza, how the ceasefire is holding up, where the cracks are already emerging, and how the Western media narrative is shifting the goalposts to maybe lay the groundwork for a new wave of potential Israeli aggression. We're also going to take a look back at some of the media coverage from the past couple of years to show how news outlets in Australia can spin facts and use certain language to help manufacture support for Israel and Israel's military aggression in Gaza. Later in the show, we're going to discuss the dire state of celebrity news coverage in Australia. Scott and I reflected on the death of actress Diane Keaton on Monday's episode. Since then, there's been a flurry of stories on her, and they kind of all suck. So we're going to look at what happened to entertainment coverage in Australia and why we have read some of the worst articles on one of the best actresses in a very, very, very long time. We'll look at what's happened to entertainment coverage and share some of the worst coverage on one of the best actresses that we've ever read.
And I love celebrity gossip. Like, this is a topic close to my heart. It is actually, I think, important, and we can explain why.
Plus, in keeping tabs, what Bari Weiss has been up to since taking over at CBS, and why Australian media commentators are fawning all over her. And Scott has some takes on one particular news outlet's poll about birds that he really wants to get off his chest. And a reminder that if you want to support the work that Lamestream does, you can do so by subscribing at lamestream.com.au. It also gives you access to all of our stories and our newsletter full of breaking news, analysis, and our recommendations from the week. You can do that by subscribing at lamestream.com.au. But first, Scott, we're now a few days on from Donald Trump's visit to Israel and to Egypt, formally endorsing his so-called peace plan. Where are things sitting at the moment?
Yeah, so as the ceasefire itself, since prisoners were exchanged, Israel told the United Nations on Tuesday that it will only allow 300 aid trucks in per day, which is half the number that had been agreed on Friday. They're saying that they're restricting that aid in retaliation for Hamas having not yet handed over some of the bodies of Israelis it had been holding who have died. So that is restricting aid to Gazans as punishment for Hamas. I look forward to any Australian outlet reporting that way.
Yeah, me too.
So far, even that reduced number of aid trucks have not actually been allowed in Oz as we record. They may be in the next 24 hours. There have also been 2 violations of the ceasefire, with between sort of 7 and 9 people killed in 2 separate incidents in Gaza and Khan Yunis by Israeli forces as we're recording this. But let's go back, Oz, to this extraordinary speech that happened when Donald Trump visited the Knesset a couple of days ago, which happened since we last spoke about this. I stayed up and watched the whole thing live, and I just could not believe some of the things we heard, which I don't think the media has done a very good job of explaining to people. It was an hour-long speech. It sort of has to be condensed down in reporting, but some of the stuff he said was legitimately astounding. And I think as we all try and understand what is going on right now, how to feel about it, there's a lot in this speech actually that confirms a bunch about what this deal is, what's behind it, what Netanyahu's regime has been sort of trying to do. What did you think of it? What did you think of Trump's speech and what he said?
Well, I didn't stay up and watch the entire thing that night because I just kind of couldn't bear to, but I have since caught up and seen the whole thing. And I mean, the speech is crazy. The way it was received in the Knesset is crazy. Basically, everyone you see in the speech, like Donald Trump, all of the American officials that are there, all the Israeli parliamentary members who are standing up and applauding every 30 seconds. These people are all war criminals and should be in jail. Like that is what makes this so surreal to watch. And one thing that I did watch that night, and it was weird to me that there wasn't heaps more attention on this. There are actually 2 quite far left Israeli MPs who protested Trump. They were calling for Palestinian recognition, and they were ejected. It seems odd that the Western media didn't want to make more of a deal about that. This is obviously a huge deal for Israeli politicians in the context of just how powerful and how far right the Israeli government is for them to do that. I mean, I think the speech was revealing for so many reasons because it really just laid out in that weird Trump way where he can just be kind of honest to a point where he reveals so much more than I think he intends to about how we got here, how Trump makes decisions and who his inner circle is on these issues. And, we were talking about how you could have all these stories that are what did we really learn about Trump's decision making, or 8 things we didn't know about this deal that Trump revealed in his speech. He just said all of these things about who wields power, about how decisions are made, about how much he lent on Netanyahu. And instead, the vast majority of the coverage was just Trump goes, gives this speech. Sure, it's a bit colorful, but what a momentous day for peace in Israel. I feel like it really undersold what we saw as he spoke for an hour in Israeli parliament.
Yeah. The way that, it got condensed down into sort of, Trump thanks Netanyahu, endorses him, Netanyahu endorses him, end of story, great day. And there was, as you say, so much in this. It was a surreal experience watching this live. We were getting the first images of Palestinians who'd been freed, sometimes returning to their communities, discovering their families had been killed by Israel since they had been taken. And then at the same time, as you say, Trump kind of wandered into the scene of the greatest crime of the century and was talking like he was at sort of a bingo hall fundraiser in New York. It was so wild to see him, as you say, surrounded in the center of this crime scene, just being you know, there's a great man I want to mention. He's fantastic. Susie, am I right? Susie, like just the call outs, like treating this with such.
Yeah, like a wedding speech, just being like, give it up for the groomsmen's over there. You know, they've done a great job.
Just like talking about everyone like they're an uncle at like the family get together. It was pretty grotesque. But as you say, like you do have to give one thing to Trump, which is he does just say things, I think, how they are in a way that, you know, if Biden or Albanese gave this speech, it would have been short, sharp, on message, whereas he revealed so much. I thought I'd start with this little bit of the speech.
World, the Middle East, and you have this little dot. And think of what you've done. It's incredible. It's incredible. But the world is loving Israel again. And I said to him, you know, the world is big and it's strong. And Ron, ultimately, the world wins. And we don't have to worry about that now. But there was getting to be a period of time over the last few months, you know, the world wanted peace and Israel wanted peace. Everybody did. Everybody did. And what a victory it's been, right? What a victory it's been. If you would have gone on for 3-4 more years, keep fighting, it was...
Oz, we've talked about how Trump has been motivated in part in pushing this kind of so-called peace deal by public opinion, polling, that Israel had been losing support even among right-wing American voters. Again, sort of Trump basically confirmed this, is that is what pushed him, I think, in those remarks. He also talked very openly about that since he'd come to office, Netanyahu had put tons of pressure on him to approve more and more weapons to Israel. He said, quote, some of them I never even heard of, the weapons that Netanyahu wanted, but he got them to him. The most revealing bit, though, Oz, was he credited a lot of his pro-Israel policy to his biggest donor in 2016, this guy Sheldon Edelson, who died a couple of years ago. But Trump was incredibly candid about the access that pro-Israel billionaire donors have to him and how they influence his thinking, including Edelson's wife, who's still alive, was there with Trump and is a former member of the IDF, big Trump donor with their fortune, and said that she was probably more loyal to Israel than the United States. Here is a little bit of that.
The world is loving Israel again. And I said to him, you know, the world is big and it's strong. And Ron, ultimately, the world wins. And we don't have to worry about that now. But there was getting to be a period of time over the last few months, you know, the world wanted peace and Israel wanted peace. Everybody did. Everybody did. And what a victory it's been, right? What a victory it's been. If you would have gone on for 3-4 more years, keep fighting, it was getting bad. It was getting heated. The timing of this is brilliant. And I said, Bibi, you're going to be remembered for this far more than if you kept this thing going, kill. It would be it would not be the same. And I just want to congratulate you for having the courage to say, that's it, we've won, and now let's enjoy our lives and let's rebuild Israel and make it stronger and bigger and better than it's ever been before. You're going to do that. Took a lot of guts. And the choice for Palestinians could not be more clear. This is their chance to turn forever from the path of terror and violence. It's been extreme, to exile the wicked forces of hate that are in their midst. And I think that's going to happen. I've met some people over the last couple of months that want to see it happen very much.
Pretty incredible to say that in public, Oz.
Yeah, this is an example of what I was talking about, where Trump just kind of lays out how he operates, and it's like so corrupt, and maybe it's so corrupt that it just doesn't register for like Western journalists anymore. But to me, there is such an obvious like second story here, a follow-up to the actual speech, which is just Trump reveals how his decision-making works. He's bragging about how much money Miriam Adelson has, $60 billion US, and is basically saying because her husband was such a big supporter of his, he let him into the White House whenever he wanted to talk about not small things, Scott, not minor policy issues, but things as big as who owns the Golan Heights. Who does Jerusalem, the city, belong to? You will not find a breakaway story in any major Western publication that just for, and even leaving aside their bias in favor of Israel, all these places say they care about transparency and corruption and, you know, the influence of donors. Trump just says it out loud and it doesn't really get mentioned at all. And to your earlier point, the earlier tape you played of Trump talking about, you know, like the pressure that he put Netanyahu under in terms of trying to get this deal done. We talked about this on Monday, but it's been interesting seeing some of the reaction from Democrats. I was listening to the Pod Save America guys talk about this, and look, we don't really agree with most of their takes, but they're an interesting window into thinking in the kind of mainstream Democrat Party.
For sure.
And even they were acknowledging that Biden had opportunities to put pressure on Netanyahu and didn't. That the only real thing that shifted in terms of getting this ceasefire, and it's still early, we don't know if it'll hold, but you know, it does seem to be more significant than the previous ceasefire deals we've had during the last 2 years. The only thing that changed was Trump just saying enough is enough. We give you weapons and support for this. We're not going to do that anymore. And it's interesting hearing Democrats just sort of almost bemoan that Trump is the guy that did this. Like, why weren't they the guys that did it? And this is not me saying good on everyone for voting for Trump, this is worth voting for Trump or anything like that. But Democrats have to reckon with the fact that Biden could have ended this war and he didn't. And Trump is the guy that seems to have done it. Now, there's a lot of like specific little things that fall out of that, but that is just the reality of the matter now. And even Democrats are acknowledging it. And it's a significant, I think, moment that shows how weak the Biden administration was when it came to telling Israel to stop their genocide.
Yeah, and on whether the ceasefire will hold, whether it's kind of a actually comprehensive kind of end to the war, I want to get into that in a sec. But I do think the last really fascinating thing to me, which is important for people who are trying to understand what's going on here, was how definitive Trump was being that to him, the war is over. In fact, like he talked about it like the whole Israel-Palestine conflict was over. And that's far from the truth. But I think what's interesting about that is I think he was sending a very direct message to the Israeli politicians in the room that he does not want to see a restart to the bombing. This is behind him. He wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Job done, over. And what's fascinating about that to me, Oz, is we've seen in the last few days, I would say, a more aggressive tone in the Australian media written by columnists and journalists about kind of pre-justifying an Israeli restart to the bombing of Gaza than what we heard from Trump. This is from a piece that was published on Monday by long-serving, very senior reporter at the Nine newspapers, David Crow. And it finished with this: will Hamas change? It brought Gaza to ruin. It provoked an enemy it could not contain and it lost. Some of its members, however, will remain convinced of their glory and will want to fight on. They will provoke Israel, and the response will be implacable. When that happens, it will take incredible restraint to prevent a single clash from destroying the peace. Why is that provoking Israel? But Israel killing unarmed Palestinians just on Tuesday, not provoking. There's been no peace since calling that provoking the end of the peace. Why is Israel implacable, i.e. like unrestrainable? Like, oh, well, Israel is attacking. It's just a force of nature. Like nothing we can do to restrain that. Just like whatever they want. Like, where is anyone asking the question that we know that Israel has violated the ceasefire with Lebanon 4,500 times. They bomb Syria every week. Yet no one is asking the question, like, how will the West restrain Israel from just breaking it with impunity? Like, we have an army, Oz, that's been given, like, genocidal rules of engagement for 2 years. These Israeli soldiers being able to shoot anyone, like children. We have this from whistleblowers in the Israeli military, like from their own mouths. They've been told they will face no repercussions. They have a right-wing media in Israel telling them that all Gazans are terrorists and the only good Gazan is a dead Gazan. Like, Why is no one asking what countries like Australia need to do to uphold this ceasefire and place pressure on Israel if it has any chance? Like, it is pretty extraordinary to me, Oz, that Australian journalists are taking a more hawkish line than Donald Trump. Like, why are we seeing this?
It's a really good question, and it is worth sitting on for a second, because we're going to talk a little bit about like what happened in the aftermath of October 7 and how the media gave so much cover for Israel to do what it ended up doing. And with all that knowledge and everything we've seen for the past 2 years, seeing it start up again so quickly after the ceasefire is quite shocking. And in terms of like why it happens, I think I've been thinking about this, and I think Trump is like one factor, right? In terms of how the media cover this story. It's one factor in terms of Trump wants this done. He wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. He obviously has an enormous amount of influence on how the Western media cover Israel and Gaza. But he is not the only factor, right? Like, we are talking in terms of the outlets in Australia, decades of ingrained pro-Israel bias. The sources these journalists speak to, whether they're journalists in the Middle East, whether they're journalists in Europe, or whether they're journalists and editors back home in Australia, are overwhelmingly Israel, right? They're cultivated by pro-Israel lobby groups in Australia and by Israeli government and RDF sources. So the lines that they get, the narrative that they get, the emails that they get, the off-the-record briefings that they get, the tips that they get, the access that they get, the stories that they get, that they use to curry favor, to get headlines, to kind of build their careers up, are overwhelmingly pro-Israeli. So it leads to this weird moment where Donald Trump's like, I want this done, everyone stop killing everyone. And you end up with someone like David Crow laying the groundwork for how one errant bullet or one errant firework from Gaza could be used as justification for the IDF to start the bombing campaign. And that word implacable, like, why is he saying that? Why is a journalist, a so-called independent journalist who's just supposed to be doing independent news? Because remember, journalists are not allowed to have opinions in Australia, Scott. But he expresses an opinion that Israel's allowed to respond and their response will be implacable. Like, this is happening in real time now. The 9 papers manufacturing a line designed to help Israel justify another genocide. It's fucking outrageous.
Totally. And we've spoken about how, that yes, there have been these shifts of, humanizing Palestinians more in coverage. Like, more than 2 years ago, Palestinians are being humanized a bit. But it is so enraging and depressing, I think, Oz, that the second the story returns to kind of being a sort of like military or like intelligence kind of story, how quickly everyone goes back to absolutely manufacturing, as you say, rolling out the Israeli line. And it has very, very serious consequences, as you like allude to. Like, we know that sections of Israeli society, of the Israeli government, are hell-bent on a full restart of the invasion, bombing, and genocide in Gaza. Like, I listened to a package by the ABC's Barbara Miller, who's like a veteran foreign correspondent who's only just gone there. She filed on like Israeli settlers in favor of the full ethnic cleansing of Gaza, who are camped out on the border, ready to go across the second the government gives them the okay to go and take the land. We have had the Israeli defense minister tweeting out that they're preparing and prepared to go back in at any moment. Like, and you think about that and then the tone of this coverage, how susceptible the Australian media is right now to just buying and republishing any excuse the Israelis find to return to the campaign. It's just so shocking to me that no one sees the danger, and to remind people of why we are talking about how susceptible Australian journalists are to this, Oz, and the costs. As you say, you go back to October 2023 and November, the lies that got eaten up by the Australian media to justify what Israel was doing, that maintained the support of the Australian government. We could go on and on about them, but to me, the worst example is the attack on Al-Shifa Hospital that happened at the beginning of November. People remember this 3D animation the Israelis put out of this massive underground base on, quote, ironclad intelligence. At the time, Israel said it was the key to the war. That's where Hamas's leaders were. We do this, we'll finish it. The Australian ran a front page, war on Hamas Hospital HQ, and the newspaper cited kind of completely unfounded kind of admissions, quote unquote, that were leaked by Israeli sources saying they obtained this information from interrogations, that's where all of the Hamas leaders were, under the hospital. At the ABC, the worst stories on this had no byline. No one put their name to them.
Wow.
And in them, you had Israeli spokespeople talking about this base for paragraphs and paragraphs with just these vague supporting sentences like, the US said on Thursday its own intelligence supported those conclusions. The same was in the Nine newspapers, that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, as kind of balance, you'd have Médecins Sans Frontières say that there's people that can't be moved out, patients are at risk. Weirdly, they didn't have the space for, in those same statements from Médecins Sans Frontières, they had doctors there in person saying, we're sending ambulances out the front door to get people off the front of the hospital who are wounded, and the Israelis shoot the ambulances. We've got snipers taking out patients who are inside the hospital. No space for that. Oh, it's only a independent doctor, international doctor inside the hospital using their own eyes. But we don't have space for that. We've got space for this 3D animation. Well, anyway, of course today, we know there was no base. Even the animations of the command room were not based on ironclad intelligence. They were reused from a video the Israelis had released a year earlier.
Yeah, what
and
a
still
joke.
today,
What a joke.
what a joke. And still today, like, there's no retraction on those stories. There's no editorial note. There's no editor writing an op-ed going, we got it wrong, like there was with the Iraq War. So, like, the lack of contrition, the fact that those pieces enabled the Labour government to still keep exporting weapons to Israel, as it has in just the last 2 weeks. We've sent 2 shipments of F-35 fighter jet parts to Israel. We only know that because of declassified Australia. You just add this up, Oz, the lack of contrition, the tone that's being taken. I'm concerned that if you're the Australian government right now looking at how to play this, if the Israelis restart, you'd be more worried about the media slamming you for not supporting Israel enough than the political cost of supporting a genocide.
I think you're right. And I think it's really important for people to understand that, because we know one thing about this Albanese government, and it is that they jump at their own shadow, that they are led in all sorts of policy debates by their fear of what the Australian or the Sydney Morning Herald might write. So it really matters what line these outlets take. It's obviously a joke that it matters, because these outlets speak to a minority of Australians and they are full of absolute fucking morons. But so is the government, right? And that is who they take their cues from. So it is important to understand how significant it is when these outlets are doing exactly what you're saying. And I mean, to go back to our friend David Crowe, who you quoted earlier, the top story on the Sydney Morning Herald this Wednesday is about Hamas reprisal attacks, right? Them executing members of rival gangs that were being armed by Israel during the war. It takes 11 paragraphs, if you're reading the top story on the SMH on Wednesday, to find out that there were also, quote, Israeli shootings as well. And that is a reference to the IDF killing between 6 to 9 Palestinians in Gaza, 2 days after the ceasefire was apparently agreed to. 11 paragraphs. And, these outlets know that the vast majority of people don't make it that far down in these stories. The top story on the website seems to be implying that Hamas is already starting a war of retaliation and vengeance, and that is designed to encourage support of Israel to fight back and re-engage if it gets to that. And I think it's like, man, like, I'm conscious of being pessimistic and cynical and negative, and I don't want, like, I actually feel slightly more optimistic about the bombing not resuming for the reasons that you said, because Trump went to Israel and he made it so linked to his own identity that I think Netanyahu will struggle to get US support if they start the bombing again. On that side of things, I feel slightly more optimistic than I did even on Monday. Generally speaking, I think like Australians in particular need to be really honest about like how much shifted in the last 2 years. Seeing the media do this stuff all over again suggests to me there's been no reevaluation, no real change or concern in the highest levels of the Australian media about this stuff. And then beyond that, I'm not involved in any of the activist groups organizing the protests. I'm not a member of any political party. I think people put in a lot of work over the last 2 years to put pressure on the Australian government. We have to be really real about the fact that our government is still, as you said, sending fighter jet parts off that are being used in Israel. We are signed up to an AUKUS deal that gives $300 billion to the US. The US uses $30 billion of its military budget every 2 years to support Israel with weapons and bombs and all sorts of terrible things. We are intrinsically tied to this, and none of those bonds broke. And that is just an important thing, I think, for people to think about in terms of what we really achieved in the last 2 years. And as we see the media start to shift to being so pro-Israel again, people can't tap out, you know? Like, this is like, it's still really bad. The media is making the same mistakes it did. And in fact, I shouldn't even call them mistakes because they're doing it deliberately. And I think they deserve to be called out and critiqued on all of that.
Particularly to me, Oz, when you've got other newspapers around the world publishing, all of the admissions that soldiers were told that people carrying plastic bags was enough of a reason to shoot them, that putting kids up on fences to look over them was enough reason to shoot them. Like, we have this from whistleblowers, and there is still no interrogation that these Palestinians who were shot this week could have been shot deliberately, unarmed, like nothing. I think we're in a really delicate moment right now, Oz. As you say, like, this peace deal, even though there is so much to go and to work out, as we covered on Monday, it may hold simply because Israel really cannot continue a military campaign if the US don't support it. So it may happen, but it is still incredibly delicate whether or not the kind of full bombing of Gaza resumes, because there's still so many bad ways that this peace deal could kind of be exercised. I think anyone who cares about this should be extremely vigilant. Whether Hamas can stay in Gaza is going to be a huge sticking point. What the size of the so-called kind of safe zones that Israel demand that it still occupies inside Gaza is going to be huge. And we're going to see all kinds of chicanery and kind of breaches of international law in working this out. Like, those safe zones, could we see settlement within those parts of Gaza? We know that huge swathes of Israeli society want that. We know that the government is very in favor of that across the West Bank. They want to prevent a Palestinian state from coming into existence. There could be more sort of limited bombings, strikes inside Gaza with impunity, the seizing of property and land for redevelopment. These are all things that are very live, even with the ceasefire holding, with the peace deal moving forward. It is really a time, as you say, for like vigilance and skepticism and looking very closely at what goes on.
Yeah, which makes it all the more grim that the Australian media, rather than engaging with all of these really serious and fundamental questions, is like, how do we repeat the post-October 7 playbook to just make sure Israel has as much cover for whatever they want to do?
Absolutely, Oz.
All right, after the break, how the Australian media did Diane Keaton very, very dirty and the dire state of entertainment journalism in Australia. Scott, when Diane Keaton died, do you know what I immediately thought? I thought, I wonder what kind of massive fortune and properties she left behind. And Scott, luckily for me, realestate.com.au had me covered with their story, Massive Fortune and Properties Diane Keaton Left Behind. Thank God for the real estate media in Australia. Domain, the other competitor to real estate, had their own version of the story as well. Diane Keaton bought her dream house in 2011. It was for sale months before her death. Come on, man.
I hate these quick real estate write-ups. I mean, the reason they get done is just because it's so simple to quickly do a search for somebody's property holdings and you bang in a keyword of someone. But like we saw this with Keith and Nicole, when their split emerged, we had stories on their kind of property holdings. I clicked a headline this week about Luke Longley, the Australian who played with Michael Jordan, because the headline like implied he was in like massive financial trouble. And I was like, oh no, Luke. Nope. It's just like a profile of his coastal property in WA. And at the end, he says his kids are grown up and he's downsizing. But it's just like a profile on the number of bedrooms. It drives me mad, these articles.
There you have it, folks. Even co-host of Lamestream can be dudded into clickbait about Luke Longley's property profile.
I get dudded all the time by clickbait. I sort of like when I get dudded, to be honest.
Yeah, man, it is kind of grim to me that, the Australian media ecosystem has multiple publications focused specifically on like celebrities in the property market, and then other mainstream publications tend to cover that stuff as well. And whether it is Luke Longley or whether it's Nicole Kidman or whether it's Dan Keaton, the work of these like very famous, very successful people gets reduced to how much property do they own and when did they last sell it. But even aside from the real estate quick hits, as you put it, I felt like this week there was a real lack of interesting, compelling, smart writing about Diane Keaton, her life, her career, her work. And this is someone who worked with some of the best directors in history. She bridged drama and comedy. She had multiple arcs to her career. She was a champion for women in Hollywood. And most of the coverage in Australia was either like tabloid stuff that just reposted TMZ stories about, when the 911 call was made and stuff, or like a list of 5 Diane Keaton films you should watch. And that was the ABC's 2 contributions to this online. One was a list of Diane Keaton movies you should watch, and also here's what TMZ said about how Diane Keaton died. And the one or two other contemplative, longer pieces that I did see in the Australian media were total garbage. Like the most bizarre one, I have to tell you about this one. It's a piece in The Australian by Jenna Clark. And it opened with, for those of us sick of the hashtag hype of culture, Keaton was the reigning queen of cool. And it said that Keaton championed androgynous dressing before pronouns became fashionable. Man, that sucks so much because what the paper's doing there, it's already dragging Keaton into this stupid culture war over gender that she has no part in, right? And it also, this kind of like, Diane Keaton was cool before like the internet was a thing and like she wasn't part of this hashtag hype culture, kind of painting her as this really old school person, this relic of a different era that wasn't engaged with contemporary stuff. It's like not true. One of the most interesting things about Keaton is how relevant and plugged in she remains. She published a design book called The House That Pinterest Built, which covered her journey into designing a house using Pinterest, right? In terms of hashtag culture, like that's pretty up there. And the piece, it just kept going back to politics and trying to make Keaton, a lifelong Democrat, fit into the Australians' like retrograde worldview. It was trying to position her as this warrior against cancel culture because in 2014 she refused to condemn her former partner Woody Allen. But Scott, the weirdest bit is this, right? It's a bit talking about how Diane Keaton was such a great on-screen mum. And it goes, before the crass Stifler's mum gag by the equally idiosyncratic Jennifer Coolidge in American Pie, Keaton was the mother figure you wanted or wanted to be. A couple of things to unpack there, right? Before Stifler's mum, Keaton was the mother figure you wanted. So is that implying that people wanted Stifler's mum to be their mum? Like, I don't understand that like reference at all. And also saying the equally idiosyncratic Jennifer Coolidge. Like, I rate Jennifer Coolidge. I've met Jennifer Coolidge. I've spoken to Jennifer Coolidge. She's great. No disrespect to her. I don't think she's got anything to do with Diane Keaton. I don't think there is any like overlap there culturally, artistically, anything.
There's nothing. Like, I love Jennifer Coolidge too, but like that comparison would be like, I mean, that's an Anne Bancroft obit. Like the mum in The Graduate, not Diane Keaton.
Yeah.
Like that is ridiculous. And the most insane comp ever. It screams to me that no one else at this paper will write about women. So I got to sign this like 2 hours ago and jumped on Google. And I actually read this to Oz. And it also talks about her Taylor Swift-style short-lived romances with Hollywood leading men.
Yeah.
I mean, setting aside defining someone as amazing as Diane Keaton by like the men she had like romances with, like set that aside. If you're gonna talk about it because it is like part of her story, it's still wrong. Like short-lived fling, like her and Al Pacino had like a multi-decade on and off of circling each other, never being the right time. She called him the love of her life. Like it's just not right. It's like dumb culturally and politically and also inaccurate. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Pacino, by the way, came out this week and was like, my biggest regret was like not marrying Keaton, which like he's married now. Imagine being Pacino's wife and seeing him say that.
I mean, if you're Pacino's wife, you just got to take that out. Like, I'm sure he does regret it. Like, he should regret
strongly
it.
encourage people to Google Al Pacino's wife. There's just a lot we could say about that situation we don't need to get into. But it was interesting to contrast, Scott, the Australian coverage of this to even different outlets overseas, right? And this is kind of what I want to talk about is like, why does it seem so bad here? The Guardian UK did a really interesting thing. They commissioned a roundtable of 11 different critics to reflect on Keaton. It was a really interesting piece, really thoughtful, and you got really good, smart perspectives about her contributions to Hollywood. The Hollywood Reporter wrote this long piece about her contribution to film. The New York Times had heaps of pieces, including one on her fashion and style. Just really interesting, smart stuff about someone who was not only very talented, but also really popular. So, like, good, interesting commissions from smart writers talking about culture and why this stuff matters. And look, we could talk about Keaton for the rest of the show, but it isn't really just about her, right? Like, this is an example that made us want to talk about this. It feels like celebrity coverage generally in Australia is worse, more moribund, more lazy, more SEO driven, more clickbait driven than ever. It feels like there are so few writers with experience and knowledge and ideas left, and those that are don't really get to lean into it. They're just told to like, hey, pump out something that will be optimized for how Google search works. And it's sort of sad because celebrity stuff, it often gets written off because, oh, it's fluffy pieces about famous people. Who cares? But it doesn't have to be that, right? It doesn't have to be how many properties do they own. Here's a list of their boyfriends. Film, music, TV, it is like all art. And especially, we talked about Redford, we talked about Diane Keaton, the stuff created in the 70s, the peak of Hollywood's independent wave, right? Talk about Reds. You've got like communist directors making pro-communist movies that made millions of dollars and won heaps of Academy Awards. This is such an important era to remember, especially because it is so different to our current era, where everything is hyper-capitalist, owned by one or two giant billionaires, and it feels like we're missing something like that. It feels like a perfect time to engage with what art used to be and how we could get back there, but we're not getting anywhere near enough of it.
Totally. And I probably believe this even more fervently than you. Like, I really think celebrity reporting can be brilliant when it's done right. I remember, when I was quite young, I got obsessed with reading Cameron Crowe, the film director, the profiles he wrote when he was a teenager, working for Rolling Stone. And there's an amazing one with David Bowie just before he disappeared to Berlin and began to get clean. It's the height of Bowie's cocaine era. And he's so revealing of himself to Crow, like very unguarded about, like, he's only eating capsicums and drinking milk. And it's like super raw, and it's like super telling of the cultural time. It was written in the kind of pressures of celebrity in that era. And I'd even like, not just the profiles and the intellectual kind of criticism, but even like celebrity gossip reporting, I think can be fantastic. And like Andrew Hornery is a controversial figure for some, and it was really like the gossipy type of celebrity reporting that he still does, but did in his column, Private Sydney. In his farewell column, Oz, he talked about so many amazing stories, but to just prove to you that gossip reporting can be really fascinating. Like, do you remember that incredible story where James Packer got into a punch-on a public street in Bondi with like his lifelong friend, the head of Nine, David Gingell?
Yeah, I've got to packer up my clacker, of course. Yeah.
Amazing. One of the greatest headlines in Australian history. But Hornery like staked out Packer's house after the fist fight and realized that Packer like brought together this hilarious like war council to figure out how to respond to the story about the punch-on. And this like war council included Lachlan Murdoch, Karl Stefanovic, and former Labour power broker / informant to the US government on what was going on inside the Labour Party, Mark Arbib. Like, what Incredible. An amazing just like snapshot of like who is powerful in Australia that you only got through gossip reporting. And just in general, like even the local C-grade stuff, the Yarborough sisters, the Ingham chicken heiresses, like there is something about the culture and politics of a city in that social and celebrity gossip when it's done well. But like these days, it's just like write up their Instagrams and write up the property search on their house. And there's just like none of that, like the fabric and kind of that touchstone with like a city and a culture and what it means.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm like slightly more out on like stories about the Ingham sisters and the Yarborough sisters, but I do understand. It's a way to understand a city. Like that is true. And like, look, you know, it can be good. We delivered an exclusive on Keith Urban last week, and to be honest, I was kind of devastated that it wasn't aggregated by all the gossip sites. Like, it still hasn't been reported. But it is sad to see like big media companies that used to do that kind of interesting stuff now just do the clickbaity stuff that doesn't really add much. You know, the SMH and The Age published a story on October 3 about Urban and the rumors around the bandmate, rumors that we debunked, based on like nothing, just a rehash of what was there on other gossip sites. It's like, what is the point of you as a subscription newspaper with experienced, smart journalists if you're just going to redo what TMZ is doing? And they did it again this week after photos appeared of former Canadian PM Justin Trudeau and pop star Katy Perry on a yacht. And it's like, what are you doing here? Like, this doesn't seem necessary. I will say this particular story by journalist Carl Quinn was actually kind of funny in how it was done. It included lines like, to date, there is not a single photo of the purported couple in which both of their faces are clearly visible at the same time, which means they might be a couple and they might not. And then in brackets, leaving aside for a moment the question of what business that is of anyone's anyway. I find a lot of shade in this story. And then there was one line, a subheading, does any of this even matter? Before the reporter answers, not a bit. Both are single and are free to date whomever they choose. Which this is funny. This is like a way for the paper to get the clicks from the photos and the headlines and maybe like take the piss of all of this stuff at the same time.
That's incredible. We've got to start a new segment, which is like the reporter didn't want to file the story. Like,
yeah, they really had big vibes of that.
It's unbelievable. I reckon, by the way, this isn't like to ape your Keith and Nick exclusive because I actually don't have a source. This is just speculation.
Yeah.
But like, I've got a theory that I just want to quickly share with you. Justin Trudeau steps down as Canadian Prime Minister last year, right?
Yeah.
Katy Perry divorces Orlando Bloom 3 months ago. I'm just saying.
What are you
overlap? Saying? Overlap?
Interesting. But like,
I'm just saying it's an interesting timeline.
I think the only rebuttal to that is I think the main motivation for Trudeau stepping down was not to have more time to cavort with Katy Perry. Your face is so funny. I think it was because he was leading his party into oblivion. I think that was the primary motivation.
You're making it boring.
Sorry. You're going to have to go to every single other media outlet if you want more of this gossip speculation. Coming up after the break, why Australia's media are clamouring for our own version of Barry Weiss and why Scott hates birds. Scott, time for keeping tabs. A little while ago, we covered the remarkable rise of Barry Weiss, the right-wing pro-Israel media figure who's now running one of the biggest TV networks in the world, despite having no TV experience. And interestingly, since we last talked about it, there's been a bit of Australian media reaction to her appointment. And it's interesting because it shows like how little diversity of thought we have left in the Australian media sphere, from all of the major papers basically saying the same thing on Barry Weiss. In The Australian, former editor Chris Mitchell wrote glowingly of Barry Weiss, describing her Substack as one of the best subscriptions around. In his piece, he positively referenced an article by Zoe Booth in the AFR. I'd never heard of Zoe Booth, but it turns out she's the content director for Quillette, the right-wing publication founded by Claire Lehman. I have to be careful about how I describe Quillette because last time I talked about how I perceived its politics, Lehman threatened to sue me. So much for their commitment to freedom of speech. But Booth is now a regular columnist at the AFR, and I guess that's an indication of where that paper is going in terms of its political direction. She wrote about Weiss, and she said in the headline, why the ABC needs a Barry Weiss, and just talked about how great she was, just like Chris Mitchell. The other 9 papers, The Age and the SMH, carried a piece by Parnell Parr-McGuinness, who I do think is like the most dim-witted columnist working in Australia right now. And as usual, her column was pretty unfathomable, but she did refer to Bari Weiss as Cinderella, which I think like was supposed to take away that she thinks she's pretty good. So you got the Australian, the Fin Review, the Age and the Herald all saying Bari Weiss is great and we need more of her. What do you make of this fawning in the Australian media?
Yeah, I saw a bunch of this. I think in some cases it's just lazy journalism and writing. Like they've seen Bari Weiss as a keyword search and then try and find a way to relate it to Australia, not knowing much about her. In other cases, I think it's like a really disturbing agenda and pushing a agenda about right-wing and more corporate control of the media. Like either way, I think it shows that a lot of modern Australian journalists, Oz, I don't know what you think about this, but I think they don't understand the foundations of journalism. Like once upon a time, journalists fought for a separation between the owners of a company and the newsroom. They fought to maintain that there was like no interference. There's a wall between those two things. Of course, like Rupert Murdoch and some owners, like that was never the case. But like in the 60s and 70s, there was this wave where papers like the London Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times led this charge of saying the newsroom prints the news without fear or favor. The owner stays out of it. That is how the public can trust us. And the story of Weiss is about the end of that. A right-wing billionaire has bought a right-wing media startup that Weiss founded for like 10 times what it's worth to install her to run one of the biggest TV newsrooms in America, and she reports directly to him, not the CEO, not like a executive, to him. This is the death of that principle that has carried journalism forward for like the last 50 years. And the fact that so many in Australian journalism are so brain dead, they don't even understand their own industry and the erosion of it is just wild.
Yeah, it's interesting that some stories I was hearing when we went on strike at the 9 papers last year, that I think in the 2000s, staff at the Age and the Herald went on strike because they were opposed to there being an ad on the front page, right? They just thought that was, blurring the boundaries between the commercial side of the business and the news side. Now, these papers are like wrapped in 17 pages of Harvey Norman ads every time. This is what these papers and their staff used to fight for. And now you've got a Quillette journalist or a Quillette content director and Parnell Parr-McGuinness saying, Bari Weiss is amazing. What a great structure. It's a really, really depressing signpost of where things are. Weiss, Scott, what has she been up to while the Australian media's been fawning all over her? Well, one of her first orders of business since taking over CBS was organising a big, impressive panel discussion on Gaza, featuring Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice. Really compelling TV to have these two people zoom into a studio and talk about how much they love Israel. This was Weiss's first big splashy project. She's the new media genius, Scott. So how did she go? Well, right now, 4 days since this was uploaded to the CBS YouTube, the video has 15,000 views on YouTube. Like, not that impressive, but you know what makes that seem even way less impressive? For reference, Scott, your interview with Gary Stevenson, Gary Economics, from a few weeks ago, has 10,000 views. Just 5,000 shy of Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton on YouTube. CBS, by the way, has 6 million subscribers on YouTube. So that is their audience. 5,990,000 whatever thousand being like, fuck this shit, this sucks.
I did not realize this, Oz. Forget everything I just said about corporate ownership. Yo, David Ellison, got another 150 mil? I'm available if you want those kind of views. I am available.
You can all listeners, you can help us out. Subscribe to the Lamestream YouTube. Boost our numbers a bit, and we could as well have our right-wing pro-Israel billionaire buyout. Otherwise, like Weiss has been really quick to integrate her right-wing publication, The Free Press, into CBS. This week, CBS boosted a story by The Free Press about New York City police officers being opposed to the election of the socialist candidate for mayor Zoran Mamdani. They interviewed the Free Press journalist on CBS. It's all happening as predicted pretty quickly, that CBS now is just becoming this right-wing outlet. Pretty grim.
Yeah, it's super sad. Often in these cases, Oz, the erosion happens over like a number of years. People don't rip up their kind of credibility this quickly. But to, see that story just get re-upped by CBS News, really depressing. And one of the great kind of historical TV newsrooms really in the world, to see that happen is pretty sad.
Totally. Hey, Scott, I got a question for you. What is your favorite bird?
Oh my God. Are we really doing this? I know where this segue is going. Oh my God. Like the pink cockatoo. I hate you.
The fuck is the pink cockatoo? Do you mean the pink?
The one, it used to be called the Major Mitchell. They don't use that name anymore for like obvious colonialist reasons.
I had no idea about this bird. Anyway, yeah, that was my attempt to segue into the Guardian's Bird of the Year poll, right? Which is something that the Guardian Australia has been running since 2017. They do it every 2 years. They run heaps of stories about birds and people vote for their favorite bird. The most recent winner in 2023 was the swift parrot. Interestingly, though, the runner-up for the last 3 years has been the same bird, the tawny frogmouth, kind of like the Sydney swans of the Bird of the Year. You, Scott, as people can guess by your reaction, you're not really a big fan of this thing that they do, are you?
No, I'm not. I mean, not this year. You know, like I think when Bird of the Year started, I got it. Like people were devastated about Trump beating Hillary Clinton, and everyone was like very sad online, and people were wearing those like pink beanies at rallies, the like so-called like pussy hats to cheer themselves up.
I forgot about this, man. That was a crazy time.
Yeah, like that was the era this was founded in. And Guardian Australia were like building this image of being this plucky, cute startup of, you know, friends who all called each other by like their newsroom nicknames on air and in the live blog. Go for it. In that climate, in that context, Bird of the Year, cute pick-me-up for all of us. I'm sure I voted one of those years, but like today, like how much legs does this thing have in it? Is Bird of the Year still picking anyone up? Like we're at a pretty low ebb. There's like giant racist rallies. There's a genocide. The bird isn't doing it anymore. We need something a little stronger, you know, like, and the size of the rollout every time, the videos, there's like an opinion article every day from a different writer making their case for their bird. There's interactives, features, like TV appearances. Like, I just can't believe, and I know all the arguments. It's like brings attention on bird life and all. I understand all of that, but I just cannot get around it at this point.
Yeah, seeing someone dressed up as like a pelican maybe on ABC News was weird. You know, this is now creeping into other news outlets.
I mean, it's like, I saw that. Like, are we at Rove Live, or like, are we in, like, it felt like Husey or someone coming out dressed as, I can't do it, Oz. I can't do it.
Yeah, I'm interested in how much you dislike this thing. I'm like pretty ambivalent to it. I don't think I voted. Maybe I voted once. I don't really care about it. My issues with it maybe are more from like a media analysis perspective. It's pretty clear. Like most polls that websites do are like click generators, you know? So this happens at a time of year. There's no election. The sports is all done. How do we keep traffic up to our website so all of our advertisers don't freak out in the month of September and October? Let's do a competition where we make people vote. And then there's different rounds. So they've got to come back and vote heaps of times so we can boost our engagement. Like, that's not to say that like that inevitably makes it bad. It's just interesting that is like a benefit of running a poll like this. Maybe I'm a bit too cynical. Maybe ultimately it's like a harmless thing. But my kind of critique of it is Bird of the Year. Like, how does the best bird change every year? Like, we're not adding new birds, not discovering new birds. It's the same freaking birds. The tawny frogmouth is the second best bird in Australia every year, going back like 6 years. What's the point of that? And my final kind of critique of it is it's called Bird of the Year, but it's run every 2 years. So what's up with that? They should just call it
That's
Australia's Bird of the last 2 years.
The biennial bird.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's
Bird
all I've
Biennale.
really got to say about this.
Maybe
I respect
Biennale's too red hot.
I respect your frustration with the bird vote. I think
It's
by the time
fine.
this episode comes out,
I hope people are enjoying it. I'm just wondering who. Like, I hope they are. I'm wondering who at this point.
I mean, you've met Guardian readers, you know who. You've got a keeping tabs for us, Scott, a final keeping tabs to round us out.
I do. I wanted to return to something we've mentioned a couple of times, which is mainstream media crediting independent media. On Tuesday, the 9 newspapers ran a story. AFP demands US site takes down PM's phone number. What is this US site? How did it get the PM's phone number? Where did the 9 newspapers find out about this website that has Anthony Albanese's personal mobile phone number? How did it come to light? In the first published version, they didn't really say, Oz. But it might have been from the day before when our fellow independent media startup, Et Media, from our friends Jan Fran and Antoinette Lattouf, ran a story about a US website that listed the phone numbers of a bunch of high-profile Australians, including Albanese and Susan Ley. The 9 newspapers, though, curiously, later in the day, did update their story with a little attribution. Quote, the publication of phone numbers was first reported by Et Media. I mean, I do have to say, bravo. An attribution at last for independent media.
That's the way to do it.
It is really funny, Oz, though, I've got to say, to only 10 days after one of your most senior editors ran an editorial saying that independent media, all it does is take hard-working reporters' work and add mayonnaise and garnish, and then you're forced into attributing independent media for a story you didn't break. I mean, that is some pretty rich stuff.
I wonder...
Bobby, Pat Elliott.
I wonder how much that influenced their decision initially to not acknowledge where it was first reported. You know, if you decided to really double down on this independent media sucks thing, it's really hard to acknowledge it. I mean, this acknowledgement came after publication. Presume, Antoinette is a very famous person, a very forthright person. Maybe there was some flagging of this. Other media outlets also acknowledged Et Media reported this story first. That's generally how things should go. That's what we've said over the past couple of weeks. Though, interestingly, they still didn't link to it, which I find curious. This is generally considered a thing. If you're going to acknowledge it, you should at least link to where it goes. And the Herald is happy to link to other outlets, when it follows certain stories or just references things. So there still feels like there's a really, really, really begrudging attitude from the editors at the Herald, the Age, the Guardian about not wanting to acknowledge that people like us exist. And if they do it in the slimmest way possible.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of do have to at least give the 9 papers, a bit of credit for updating the story and putting it in there. We're still waiting on the same from a couple of people. I mean, when I say a couple, I mean Guardian Australia on us breaking a story that Schwartz banned its journalists from going on 7am, or what was said in a very heated ABC staff meeting, or publishing the correspondence where the National Press Club confirmed Chris Hedges on its letterhead, but said that only a tentative agreement was reached. But we'll save all that for another time. I don't want to re-prosecute that. I'm just mentioning that we're waiting on a few. There's still some outstanding receipts if anybody wants to follow those up for us, Oz.
They're probably too busy arguing about magpies and galahs, honestly, to get back to us on that.
You got to take my jokes about the bird thing. Don't get too hurt about my jokes about the bird.
I'm not.
Thing.
I was making a joke about the bird thing.
No. I'm saying to anyone listening at the Guardian, you got to take my jokes about the bird thing. You got to kind of take that raz if you don't give the attribution. I'm sorry, that's how it works. You got to take the gas.
It's the least they deserve. That is it from us for this Thursday. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love it if you left us a review or shared it with a friend. You can email us questions or tips at contact@lamestream.com.au. You can subscribe to support our work at lamestream.com.au. Thank you to our researcher Izzy, thank you to our producer Bez, and thank you to our video producer Schwen. Scott, see you back here on Monday.
Looking forward to it. See you Monday, Oz.